Eseonu. I work as a lecturer in politics and policy at Lancaster University. And my work is very much around racial equity and racial justice and the processes through which racial justice and racial equity can be achieved. So which is why I'm interested in participatory and deliberative processes and spaces.
I read that you define yourself as a racial justice researcher.
Yes.
How research can be political?
Yeah, so basically, I think so. So my research is political because I'm working with communities who have been historically ignored, who have been continue to be marginalised, and processes continue to exclude them from sort of policy making spaces. And so my research is political because I use a tenet from critical race theory about the voice of colour, which is around the lived experiences that no one else has access to, but only sort of people of colour because of how they're socially positioned in society. So a lot of my work is around how do I gather this voice of colour and bring it into spaces where decisions are being made really separate.
Yeah, which tools we have to include this community, these new voices inside of participatory processes or the regulatory process?
So I think one thing that I try to do and try to avoid is something called trauma porn, poverty porn, so where actually people are studied as objects, but actually I think that racially minoritized communities have agency, they are already speaking, they're just, people sometimes just don't listen. And so my work literally I use something called Afrofuturism as a philosophy of doing research, because I don't just ask, oh, what's wrong with your life? I also ask, what would you like to see happen to change aspects of your life that you feel that maybe you don't have agency on? And so Afrofuturism as an aesthetic, as a research philosophy, means that I use quite a lot of creative methods and I work particularly with young people at the moment. And so I use lots of so with the current projects I'm working on, we've done Legos to sort of build the ideal school, because we're looking at race in education. We've done zine making about identities and being proud of our identities and who we are, the color of our skin, the texture of our hair. I use kind of lots of different creative methods to try and get access to what it is like to live as a black child or racial minoritized child, and what it would like to see sort of happen to imagine a different world.
And did you work, or are you working in a real experience of participatory process? Is young people, what's the results, or what's about the process?
So I'm currently working with an amazing school called Rekindle School. They're based in Manchester, but they are going to sort of open different schools across the UK. But I think they might grow larger than the UK. But I think what I'm doing in that process, in that project, is really kind of working with young people to understand their experiences of racism in education, in the education system of the UK. And there's some really heartbreaking stories that they tell. And I've worked so before this project, I worked with other young people across the UK. And it's similar stories of how their teachers don't believe them, or, their hair has been made fun of, and all these kind of different kind of experiences. And part of what I do in my research project is then to say, okay, how do we then, what do you want to happen in a way that actually challenges racism in school and challenges racism in education?
You work about Afrofuturism. I think it's to open new narratives or new hopes also, no?
Yes.
Do you think that it's a good perspective or method to work against this polarization in the civil society that we have?
That's an interesting question. Can it work against polarization? I've only used it with racially minoritized community, young people. I think we've had one or two young white people, but they have, I think their stepdad is mixed race, so they have that connection and understanding. I think their brother, their half brother is mixed race, so they have an understanding of race. But I haven't used it in as a bridge between kind of different communities. So that is an interesting question. Would it allow and allow, can you work as a bridge from polarized communities? Potentially, I think if it's maybe curated properly, if actually there's some work that's done with white communities, is that what you mean by polarization? Actually, yeah, and around kind of racism, yeah. So I think potentially, if there's some work that's done with kind of white communities. Get them to understand histories, like history of racism, history of colonization, histories of enslavement, and then the work is done and they're reimagining, might be then reimagining they themselves as kind of purveyors of justice, as people who like go and change the world and be to use all of the time used words to be a real ally or race treat or whatever kind of concepts that you want to use. To further the cause of justice, then why not? But that's not something I've done so far. But I think you have potential because you're going to tell the story of the past to help people understand the present, and then get them to imagine a future that's free of racial injustice. But I think it would need a lot of education for both ends, with kind of racial minorities and white communities as well.
This is like a sensibilization to the public, but you asked about Afrofuturism as a particular method for public service design.
Yes.
Can you concrete a little bit what do you mean?
So I think so. It was my colleague that I co-wrote the paper with. So she works in service design, and so we were just thinking about actually how public services actually can sometimes replicate racial inequalities. And so there's someone who wrote a book chapter on how racial minoritized communities are thought about in the service design process. So they might not be seen as sort of people with agency. They're seen as objects. They're stereotypes that are used. They're narratives that are drawn on to kind of picture the service user who's racially minoritized. And so the argument that we make is that actually Afrofuturism changes the narratives, and really challenges how particular service users are seen, because it introduces their own kind of words, their own knowledges, their own experiences into the process, to disrupt kind of these racialized stereotypes, narratives that that are not particularly helpful when you're trying to design a new service. I'll give an example to make it more concrete. So I was working with a group of service providers, and we're talking about what's the persona that uses your service. And one of the groups, in creating a persona of a racially minoritized person, they really relied on the narratives of how particular groups are seen in society. So say things like it was I think it was an 18-year-old Pakistani young person who had no aspirations and all that sort of stuff, and it was like, oh, why would you go with that? Why was that where you went to, rather than thinking like, actually, what is that person's needs to actually be able to access the service? But if you're already thinking of them in a particular way, you limit the possibilities in terms of how you design a service that's meant to support them.
If I understand well, you work with concepts, narratives, like qualitative data, no?
Yes.
But then one of the problems or that we have is how can we visualize better this kind of results or this kind of data? What are you using, or do you have any reference? I don't know.
So I think I might visualize. I think so. That's what I'm grappling with now, because I haven't done so many creative methods with young people. I have a lot of like artifacts and outputs and like audio, videos. I have quite a lot of different things, and I think that visualizing of data is something that I'm kind of thinking about now. Is actually and one of the things I'm doing actually is I'm trying to turn that into a board game. So that's one thing I'm doing. I'm trying to do an exhibition with some of the audio and some of the things that they've created, the artifacts that they've built, and some of the pictures and stories that they've drawn to kind of display that in a way that kind of brings, rather than policymakers reading a report, they actually see some of the things and listen to and things like that. And then I think the final thing, and this is only just very recently, is to think about theatre. So using kind of the theatre we oppress, political theatre. I haven't done that yet. So that's a future project.
Awesome.
But those are the kind of things I'm thinking of. How do I visualize some of the qualitative stuff that's coming out? Yeah. And obviously since I don't use statistics, I don't think about data visualization in that way, but in terms of the visualizing some of the words or things that have been created, I think those are the different ways that I'm trying to show you that.
We will have here next week a group of young people of Manchester working in a little theatre with Sonia. Last question. What's your role or the role of the researcher? I don't know if your role in the project is a researcher.
Yes, it is.
What's the importance of the role of researcher in a project that wants to change or open the idea of the democracy, the participation?
So I think for me, when I think about the role of researcher in these types of projects, it's like, what's your why? Like, why are you doing this project, and why should it be you that's doing this project as well? Like, I think those are the two questions. And so for me, the why that drives me is that I understand that there are kind of structures in society, and being within a university, I have access to resources and particular expertise that I'm using and I want to deploy in service to this community. So for me, as a researcher, my position isn't to center myself, isn't to center my own research agenda, but to actually kind of really, really work with communities to say, actually, what are you trying to do, and how can I, in this role, because I do have some privilege as an academic within this kind of colonial institution. So, and there's something that is, I've forgotten their names, but there's this book, Scholar Activism, and I probably won't call myself a scholar activist, but there's something that they say about how you can, use resources that you have access to in service of communities that you're working with. So, a lot of the times, and I learned and I learned from communities. There's so many things that both young people, the community organizations that the young people are connected to. I learned a lot from them in terms of how should I do my research, and they tell me all their negative sort of experiences of researchers coming to them and then just going away with stuff. So I really try to be relational in kind of how I do my research, and really try to avoid kind of extractivism of kind of getting the knowledge, harvesting it, and then just going away and not sort of doing anything that really kind of supports either the individual project or the community organization project. So yeah, that's what I see for me anyway, the will of a research.
Those, if you have some students that you want to research in the future, what are the questions that they need to have obligatory, so for sure?
So I think it's like, why should I do the project? It's just like, why should I do it? Is that, that would be one question. And it's like, how am I going to center the experiences of communities that I'm working with?